Hello guys, and welcome to another vlog with VO. And today's a bit different because I am now putting Ray, our creative director, in the hot seat. So we've turned the tables a little bit on him, and I'll be hitting him with the hard-hitting questions about branding. So without further ado, Ray, here is the first question. Why is branding so important?
Why is branding so important? Well, I kind of look at branding as like someone's face. So why is my face important? Why is your face important? Well, people don't know who I am if I don't have a face.
That's true.
Okay, so branding becomes the face of your business. Back in the old day, where the term branding came from was you have cattle and you'd get a brand and you'd stick your mark on them or your brand on them. So you could say, hey, that's mine. And in business, we need to kind of say that. We need to say, hey, that's mine, that's my letterhead, that's my advert, that's my product. So that's kind of the base where branding sits. But why it's so important this day and age is so you can actually separate yourself from the crowd and you can make yourself memorable.
That's exactly right, because you put all this hard work into your business and you don't want anyone else in there leeching off you or anything like that, taking your hard work off you.
Rustling your cattle.
Absolutely, and that's the last thing you do want. So that's why I think it's important too.
100%.
But what makes a brand good and what makes a brand bad?
Okay, this is a particularly subjective question, I believe, and somewhat ambiguous, but I'm okay with ambiguous questions. What makes a good brand? I think what makes a good brand is it's being recognisable and what message it portrays, okay? So if you want to look cheap because you sell cheap products, your brand should look cheap. It's funny.
That doesn't necessarily make it a bad brand.
No, it's not. It kind of potentially looks bad and not in my taste necessarily, but it is effective. And I'd rather say effective brand as opposed to good brand. And let's say bad brand is an ineffective brand. If you look really expensive and you're trying to sell cheap stuff, then it's an ineffective brand.
Absolutely. And I think the other point to that, Ray, is consistency as a brand.
Absolutely, yeah. You got to keep that's why we create branding guidelines and so on, so forth. You know, you don't ever see Coca-Cola in green, do you?
Absolutely right. And I think if you've got, as you mentioned, a brand that looks luxurious and selling good products, but if they've got elements that are out of line, that damages the brand.
I agree.
And I think that's just as important as a good brand can turn bad quite easily when everything's not in the line.
Well, let's take in perspective personal branding, because that's important as well, and something that we're very focused on these days with brand influencers and even politicians and actors and all of any professional really, including ourselves. So if your brand is to be, my brand's to be reasonably happy and laid back and fun, if I put out a brand or a personal brand that is kind of angry and grumpy and overly serious, then it's off-brand and people go, whoa, what's going on there? And it ruins my personal brand.
Absolutely. And that touches on the next question. So what are those elements that make up the brand? What are those things that can be off? So, I mean, you've mentioned, obviously a lot of people think it's a logo, but there's obviously a lot more to it that can be off-brand, as you say.
That's correct. One of my favourite examples of a full branding package would have to be Skype. So one of the things that, I think Apple sits in this zone as well, but one of the things that Skype did well is they had a specific tone in their calling dial tone that was part of their brand. So branding is more than just, as you say, logo, colour, font. It's messaging strategy, it's the message you send out to the public at any given stage, it's what dial tone you choose, it's what sound bed you use, it's what people you put in front of the camera. All of these things come into play to create a brand, and it's not just a logo.
Absolutely, and I think the best way to describe it to anybody is every single touch point you ever have with any of your clients. So everything that's out there, your product even, is part of your brand, and 100%. I think that's often overlooked as well.
I think it's the biggest part of your
Absolutely.
brand, to be honest.
It's always overlooked in the term branding. I think
Correct.
That's the other thing. So what should people look for in a good brand?
Well, I'm going to hark back to what I said before, effectiveness.
Yep.
So is your brand effective in the sense that will it portray the correct message that you want? And when we go through our branding process with any client, we actually sit down for a meeting that's like an hour, 2 hours long, and trying to understand the personality of the brand, which seems kind of strange. You go, oh, it's an inanimate object, but to be honest, it's not, because what's behind the brand is people. We haven't actually got any artificial intelligence running companies at this stage.
Not yet.
But when they do, then we can say they might not have a personality, or it might be just a bit robotic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a meeting with our clients and any stakeholders, and we work out the personality. So we go a lot deeper in understanding a brand. So we try to understand the psychology of not only the people that are running the business or developing the brand, but who they're going to in the market. So branding, if it gets drilled right down, we start at psychology first. In fact, I've been saying to people lately, I'm over dealing in the conscious mind. I only want to deal in the subconscious mind, because that's where all decisions are made.
Correct.
So you need to make sure all of those subconscious touch points are hit, and these kinds of discovery meetings are very important.
Absolutely. I think that super important, because it sets the tone for all of your messaging, as you said, but all of your marketing, everything you ever put out there needs to match up with those personalities.
100%.
And I think a lot of people go wrong. They think, their marketing has to be salesy all the time, and it never really fits. I don't know anybody who's that pushy in their personal life.
That's right.
So, as you mentioned, you had a good anecdote the other day about a guy at a barbecue, and he would never come in and talk about selling all the time, because he won't be invited to the next barbecue.
That's exactly right.
That was one of my favourite anecdotes.
You like that one?
Ray.
Okay.
One of the best ones. And finally, to the last question.
Oh, good.
What is the big idea in branding?
That's an interesting one, and again, ambiguous, and I love ambiguity. Is that a word?
I think it's close enough.
It's a good word. I like it. Let's make it a word if it's not. I'm pretty sure it is. Anyway, I kind of like that concept of the big idea, and generally what we do when we go through the process is you go, oh, look, we can pull elements from the name, and that obviously is a driver in how you come up with the brand. And the brand can actually be anything from a name mark to a picture mark, but the big idea is what sits behind it, not what's obvious. And hunting for that big idea is at times difficult, but we're always on the hunt. We're like a couple of old duck shooters, So we're always looking to find that big idea that you can really resonate with, and you can, when people know it, they go, wow, that's cool. Good example, Commonwealth Bank. So we go, oh, that triangle thing with the little black bit, but it's the Southern Cross. Okay, so they made a lovely iconic shape from the Southern Cross. Southern Cross on its own, it's like been overused and overdone and a little bit passé now, but what the Commonwealth Bank did with it was created their icon from it. That's the big idea.
Much like FedEx, who have the forward arrow in between
Correct.
the E and the X, and a lot of people don't see it, but it's subconsciously there.
Subconscious, that's right.
And I think that's one thing that is very hard to achieve, and it reminds me of a saying from Einstein, who said, true intelligence comes from taking something extremely difficult and doing it simply.
That's right.
I don't think that was the actual quote, but the relevance is there.
Yep.
And I think that is your hardest job, and the creative team's hardest job, to get that simplicity from that overarching message into action.
Well, one of the things I like to say is a brand or a design isn't perfect when you've added everything you can to it. It's perfect when you've taken away everything you can to it. Absolutely. And that's that simplification method.
Well, thank you, Ray.
My pleasure.
It's okay. You'll be back in the hot seat next week with the next vlog. But until then, this is Pete, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.